Hello, I want to welcome you to the Google Data Studio course. What we're going to do in this course is get the fundamental understanding of Google Analytics, how to create a dashboard, how to load in data, some visualization theory, and the pros and cons of the actual product. Now, Google Data Studio doesn't get a lot of love when you think about dashboarding products or visualization products. You got Tableau, you got Power BI, and you don't really hear Google Analytics in that conversation a lot, mostly because it's a free product and it has some cons, but it also has a lot of good features. So let's just dive in and look at some examples of the dashboards that are created here. So we have a website that is provided by Google that gives us a gallery of different dashboards that are created. I'm just going to click on one. It's not the fastest load, and this is one of the issues with the product. It's not slow, but it's definitely not as fast as some of the other products out there. So we're looking at a Google Analytics template, all search console. So we can see there's a standard visualizations that you see, and it's a nice dashboard. And there's a lot you can do. We can also look at a more stylized dashboard, and where Google Data Studio really comes through and shines is with mapping data, of course, because it's Google and they have a whole lot of mapping data. And it really looks nice. I think this is a great dashboard that helps communicate the insights that are needed. You are not limited to just plain old online data. You can bring in any data you want. There are a few steps to get that data into Google Analytics, and I'll take you through that. Let's just keep exploring some dashboards here. I'm going to load in a few, and we can quickly look at those while they are loading. Here is another dashboard. It's not the greatest. I think the color scheme is a bit weird, and we can talk about colors also. Here's one that has a little bit more style to it. Also, I think a little bit confusing, so we can figure out what's the best strategy for us. There is some other helpful pages that we can use, and I'll put those in the description. So let's get started in how we actually get data into Google Data Studio. So let's get started with loading some data into Google Data Studio. It's very easy. So if you have a Google account, which is going to be necessary for this, for you to actually use Google Data Studio, you can simply just go over to googledatastudio.com and you'll be able to pull in that data. So I'm going to start with Google and just write Google Data Studio in. And what you're going to see is they're going to bring us to one of the sites. You can see, don't click on one of the ads, but it's literally datastudio.google.com. And once we open that up, you can see that some of the reports that I interacted with, you can see they have been loaded in here. Now you have the navigation here, which takes you through reports, the data sources, the Explorer, and we'll get into that a little bit later. And then the reports that are shared with you and the ones that are owned by you. And here are some more reports that you can kind of look at to give you an idea of what you can achieve with Google Data Studio. What we're going to do is create a blank report by clicking on the blank report. And that is going to prompt us to add a data source. So that's the great thing. It's very easy to do. There are a lot of different connectors. You can see you have the Google Analytics connector. That means you're going to have to put in your credentials. We have the Google Ads, Google Sheets, BigQuery, which is a SQL-based database system, and then a whole host of things where we can upload files here and everything else. So just to get this, to make it simple, we're going to use a file upload, and we're going to upload a e-commerce data set that we can interact with. So what we're going to do here is go to file upload and click into that. And you can see that's going to give us an option to load in a file. You can drag and drop it. So I'm going to just drag that in. Now it initiates the upload for us. And so what this essentially is going to do is turn this into a Google Sheet, which is one of the kind of requirements to kind of interact with that file. And you can see that we got an error here. I'm not sure why, so we can view it by clicking on this. And it says there was an error processing the file process empty column header. So that is one of the things we're going to have to go and fix. So I'm just going to open my Excel doc up. See that empty space there, so I'm just going to go and delete this. I'm going to resave that. Now what I'm going to do here is remove this with the symbol there, add the file again, and I'm just going to navigate there. That uploading here, you can see the processing where it's going to turn that into a Google Sheet from a traditional CSV. Now you can see that it's uploaded. Now that we have that data there, we can go to add. We are about to add the dataset, which is the CSV here. We're just going to add that to the report. And now what you can see is our report window. And it's giving us a column within our data, which is the invoice number, and a records count, which is just as a count. We have our available fields here. And we can take a look at what each one of these icons mean, because this is the different data types. So let's just get familiar with the architecture here. We have our country, which is indicated by this geo symbol. We have 1, 2, 3, which is going to be our integer or number, our date, which is the calendar, our time, which is also going to be a calendar. Anything with the text is going to be an ABC, and those are our different fields there. And you can see record count, which is an aggregation, which is in blue. This is a visual that they have already given us. We can move that around. Clicking on this visual here is going to give you more options, and we're going to go into this a little bit more. You can see the data set here is the one we brought in, which is the CSV. You can see that the column or dimension that we brought in was the date. Also, we brought in the invoice number. And we have our metric there, which is our records count, which is an aggregation there. We have all of our tools that we're going to get familiar with here. Adding pages to our report. You're limited to 5 pages for the free version. We can add another data source. We can add another chart. We can add symbols. And then we add filters and controls and other elements that we can add, like shapes, lines. And we're going to get into this quite a bit. From edit, you can see it's pretty standard, copy and paste. The view, we can talk about how things should be viewed. Insert, these are the different elements, charting elements we can insert. The page, with creating the new page, we can arrange things by order. Here's our resource, which is our blends and our filters. So we'll get into that, and of course, the other elements here. We also have themes and layouts that we can choose, but we'll get into that later. Before we begin visualizing our data, let's make sure that our data is in the right format. Also, we want to do a join to bring in some different type of data. And we're also going to explore what this data set is. So first, we have our data. And if we click on this visual, you can definitely see that we have our different fields. But let's create our own table. So what we're going to do is we're just going to erase this, and let's create a table from our existing data here. So let's look at the hour and the quantity that we have here. So we can do that in a few ways. We can definitely add a chart with this section where we go add and we add a chart here. So maybe we want to add a line chart. We click that and we're able to drag that in. Now that we have that structure, you can see the first thing that happened is that there's a date and it gave us the records count. Now we may not want the records count. We may want the quantity here, so we bring that in. And you can see that turns to blue, and then we get a different aggregation. If I click that off, now you can see we have the sum of the quantity. So we are looking at an online e-commerce data set where we have the customer ID, the invoice number, the quantity, the stock code, and the unit price. We are missing a field here that we need to add, and that would be a revenue field, which would be the unit price times the quantity. So we need to add that in. And this is your fields list, so we can add a field. So I'm going to go down to this section here where it says add a field and click. And now you see we're given this particular window, and we have a format formula. And we have a calculation ID, and then we name our field. So let's name our field revenue. Then what we want to do is get our value that we're concerned with. So we know we want this, so we can drag and drop that. We can add the operator that we're interested in. For example, I'm going to add the star for multiplication, and then I'm going to add unit price. Now you can see that's there, and it's accepted this as a valid formula syntax. If we click format formula, you can see what it does is just make it a little nicer. So now that we have a new field, we are going to save and go to done. Now you can see in our fields we have a new record, which is revenue. So let's leave that for a second. Maybe we can create another visual. So what if I just click on our and drag that in? You can see that it also looks for a way to create a chart. And it also creates a line chart. And I can replace that records count with our revenue. But I'm going to get rid of. So I'm just going to bring that down to see our revenue. However, let's continue to look at our data. So now that we've added a new field, we are looking at online revenue, but we may want to be able to add to this data. So the first thing I'm going to do is click into the edit data to visualize what we actually have. So you can see we have our fields, and you can see we have this function symbol, means that we've created an aggregation. Now, or created a field. So now that we've created a field, you can see we have the symbol that is a integer. We have a default aggregation that we can add. So we can add sum to that for our default aggregation. And we can say this is the revenue So now what we've done is we've created a field, We've given it a default aggregation, and then we've given it a description, which may be very important if you're sharing this. So I'm going to go to Done. And you can see now that default aggregation is the sum of revenue. If we go back into Edit Data, we have our country, our customer ID, our date, our description of what the product is, invoice, revenue, unit price. But before we continue to visualize, it will probably be a good idea to add holidays into this to see if holidays actually affect the revenue figure. And to do that, we're going to need to blend some data. So before we continue with creating a visualization, we want to make sure that we are meeting the brief or the objectives from our client, management, or whoever has tasked us with creating this dashboard. So it's a revenue analysis of an online store. We looked at some of the data. Our objective is to understand the revenue for our online store. Critical questions we need to answer through the data. Is revenue growing monthly? What is the best time and day for customers? What product is ordered the most? And then we get down to what is the data that we should be looking at? What's the granularity? So the granularity is how detailed the data is. So we want to be looking at daily data. So let's dive back into Google Data. So again, we're back in the Google Data Studio, and we know we need to look at monthly data. Now we can tell from our data that it's broken down by day. We need to get the month into our data. A column, and here are all our dimensions, and you see we don't have month there. So how about we create that? And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go back up to this section here where we going into the data and hitting the edit crayon. And you can see we can add a field as we did with revenue. So we're going to go to add field, and then we're going to use some functions. So the function we're going to use is month, and you can see when you start typing that function pops up, and that function is always encapsulated at the end with parentheses, and within that parentheses we add an argument or a specific field within our data. So I'm going to write in month there, and you can see now once we have this open, and you can pull this up a bit, you can see what the function entails, the input format and what it actually needs. So it returns the month of the year of a given date. And our given date we have in our data set, which is our date field. So what we can do, we can highlight inside that function, and you can see that as I write, we see date, but what we want to do is serve it our column. So what I'm going to do is go over to date, pull that in, and then I'm going to put it inside our function by wrapping it in those parentheses. And you can see you got the green check mark. So we definitely want to give this field a name, and let's give this month. So now we have that month column, and I'm just going to bring that in. And you can see that populate over in our field. And make sure you save this. Now that we have the month, we save it. And I'm going to go to done. And now you can see that populate. We have our function indicator. We bring that in. And of course, it's going to populate with records. And you can see that we have that in there. Of course, if you wanted to change this chart, we can go in and we can change that to a bar chart if you wanted, or just change that to a flat table. So I'm going to keep it as a flat table for right now. because we wanted to make sure that function worked. Now we want to bring in one more function here. And let's go over to our crayon that indicates things are changing. We want to add another field, and this time we want to use the weekday function. So we're going to use weekday, and we're going to grab a date because this is the field that it's going to run on. So it returns a number representing the date of the week. And I'm just going to bring that date into that function like we did with month. Just going to drag and drop it in there. We're going to get the check mark there to say everything was done correctly. I'm going to call this weekday. I'm going to go over and save that. And now you can see that calculated field as saved. We go over and we have weekday as that function symbol, means it's a calculated metric. Now what we can do, we can bring weekday in. And now you can see that's just counting, but that's not what we want. So we're going to go back up to our visualization there that you can see here in chart. We're going to go to table. And now you've noticed here that this doesn't seem right. We have the invoice number and we have weekday. And let's just take invoice number out. But something's happening here. Why is weekday being added? Because we have this aggregation here. So we can see what's happening here, that we have a sum and it's aggregating over the weekday. Change that. In the beginning, if we go back over and let me show you here, let me close this, we can see that weekday has this 1, 2, 3 as part of its structure. And we know 1, 2, 3 is an integer or a number, and that's what exactly we want, right? So we can double click that, go to all fields. Yeah. We can see the different data types there. And weekday we have a number. We don't want that as a number, we want that as text. So we go to done. And now you can see that it's a configuration error. That means we just need to re-add this. So I'm going to take that metric off. And go back up to our weekday here and add that as a dimension. And I'm going to eliminate this. And you can see what happens is it just gives me the number for the weekday. For our dimension, if we add a records count to our metric, now you can see that it's a weekday with where is the most data. So that's one way of seeing that. Now you might be asking yourself, seeing this number, it may not be the best way of doing things. So what we can do is go back and say, okay, maybe we don't want the weekday number, we want the day of week name, which should correspond to that 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? And whenever 6 and 7, whenever our weekday exists. So what we can do is go back over to our edit data section here, and we can add a new field. And now what we can do is we use a different function, and that function is going to be format date time. And you can see that pops up, and this function is going to take two parts. You can see it takes a indicator here, and it takes the date. So what we're going to do, we're going to put a symbol here that corresponds to what we want. And for this one, I am going to use the quotations. I'm going to use the % sign and an A. Then I'm going to bring my date in. And we're going to separate that by the comma. And then I'm going to bring that in, and we call this weekday name. Let's call that weekday name. And if we save that, we can see that has been accepted. I'm going to done. And now I am going to just eliminate this table by clicking delete. You can see weekday is, we've changed that to text, and now we have weekday name. I bring that in. And now you can see we have the weekday name. And what I can do now is look at the records count. And we can also go about changing this. This is a table with bars. But what I want to do is get a pivot table. And a pivot table allows me to structure what I want in terms of rows in columns. So now that I have that, I have two things that I can work with. I have the weekday names. And right now we have the stock code that was automatically populated by the AI and Google Data Studio. So I'm going to take that off. And what I want for my column dimension, because you can see we have the records count here, is the hour. So I'm going to grab that and bring that in. And now we're going to have our hour there. And it actually might be better to switch these two so we can see the whole thing. So I'm going to take the hour here, and I am going to put it here, and then I am going to bring, so the hour will be the longest part here, and I'm going to eliminate the month so we can just see this as an example. I'm going to bring that in as hour so you can see where is the day of the week, and I'm just going to make these a lot smaller just so we can keep them. We don't actually need them. We haven't started our visualization just yet. So we know we have this and we have our hour. And what we can do is bring in our weekday name as our column. And now we can look at a heat map of when we are getting the most customers. So I'm going to make that a little bigger so we can see the day of weeks when we're getting the most customers. So that means we're already getting to a point where we can answer one of those key questions that we wanted, that we got from our management. When is a time when we are getting the most customers? And we'll work on making this a little bit more visually pleasing and when we get to the full visualization stage. But you can see we need to actually sort this so we get a better look on this. And the way you sort your table, if you go over to the left pane, you can see that we have the records count, and we have sorting here, sorting by records count. If we click on hour, now you can see it's sorted a little bit differently, where we have the 8 p.m. as the last part and 6 a.m. as the first. So I'm going to click ascending. You get a better picture of how our data is organized. Now you may be asking yourself, okay, well, we don't have the weekdays sorted. So we know we are sorting by our rows here. So now by highlighting that table, you know we sorted the rows by the hour, and we can see that by the row sort here by descending to get that 8 p.m. all the way down to 6 a.m. And you could switch that around by hour if you need it to ascending. If I clicked here, you can see it goes 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. Now we want to be able to sort the columns. And there was no easy way to do this, but you can remember that right now that we have the text, and we can't sort text unless it was sorted alphabetically, and that doesn't help us. So we need a number. And if you remember what we've done before, we had a weekday dimension that we had, and we turned that into text. So how about we go back and turn that into a number, and I'll show you how to sort your columns. So the first thing you're going to go do is you're going to go back up to edit your data. And sometimes you won't be presented with this. And if you are not able to just go directly into this, go to all fields. So we know we have weekday, and we're going to turn that weekday back into a number. We're going to go over to done, and we should see that update. Now that if we have weekday in, we see we have that number, we can add that to our pivot table. And you can see if I added under the weekday name, and I added the wrong one. We want to add weekday. You can see it's replaced that. And we have 0, 1, 2, 3. And you can see that it is sorted correctly. And if you don't see it sorted correctly, you can always go down to where we have our column, and you can see it's sorted by ascending, so it's going up to 5. Now what we want to do is go get our weekday name, go back up to our column dimension, and add that under weekday. And now you can see we go Sunday to Friday there, which is all our days. We don't have, in our particular data set, we don't have Saturday. So now let's work on getting more data into our report view. So what we're going to do is add another data source and then blend that in so that we can evaluate whether our performance is better or worse during holiday periods. And this wasn't in our brief, but if you're dealing with time series data, more than likely holidays are going to come up in a conversation or may have an effect. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to go to resource, and we are in resources. So now we can start working on our data. So let's add a data source. And you can see we have our e-commerce data there. And we can also see that there are 3 charts there in the status. And you can see the connector type. We did a file upload. We're going to upload one more file. So you remember that you can access these in different ways. We're just going to do another simple file upload. And you're going to add the file that you are interested in, and it should be in the resource pack. I'm going to add my US holidays to this data set. You can see here is the CSV. It's being processed. And now it's telling us that we're about to add this to our report, so we're going to add that. If we go back over here, we can see in the corner that has been added, and we can see all the fields that we want here. Then if you wanted to change that data set, you would go over, added data sets are here. So now we can see the 2 data sets. So now we want to take some steps to blend that data. So blending is a process of layering 2 different data sets. And those data sets can be connected by something called a key or a common field. In our data set, if we look here, we also have the date that was similar to what we had in our previous e-commerce data set. But when we layer those data sets or connect them, we have to think about how we're going to connect them. And that comes up with a little bit of philosophy around joins. So let's look at the different types of joins. So you can see all the different type of joins. We have a left join, and that join is going to preserve everything in the left table. We have a right join, that's going to preserve everything in the right table. Then we have a join here where we're matching only things that are present in the right and the left table. So for our purposes, we can usually stick to these joins where we're looking at, a left join where we want to match everything that's in our left table. And when I say left, that's going to be our main table. The inner join where we're matching just the rows. And then this table where we're matching everything that's going to be in the right table or the added table. Go down and go back up to our resource. We're going to go to Manage Blends. We're going to add a blend. We want to join that table. And if you think about it, we don't want to start with the holiday table. Why? Because our holiday table is not going to be our main table, not going to be our left table. Our main table is going to be the e-commerce table. So let's get that table. And what we want to do is join. We're going to use date there. Let's get rid of this invalid part. We're going to join our e-commerce table to our holiday table. And you can see it talks about the different conditions in the join, which we kind of just had a conversation about. But we want to add more when we create this blended source, because we have to think about what we want to see in the holidays, what we want to see represented. So I'm going to configure that join, and now we can look at the different type of joins that we talked about. We can look for a left join, a right join, an inner join, a full outer join, and a cross join. We got to think about, okay, if this is going to be a separate data source, what do we actually need? Do we need to keep everything from the left table? Do we need to keep everything from the right table? Do we just want to keep the inner data, the things that match up on all, or do we want to keep a full outer join where we bring in all of the rows? So let's add what we want to add into these. We have our two join conditions where we're joining table 1 and table 2 on date, so left and right. Let's do a left join so we can kind of evaluate what the holidays exist and what don't exist, so we can see an example there. So let's do a left join first. So I'm going to add in some metrics, but we can't do it at this level. So let's go back over and let's add in our metrics and what we're going to add in. Let's add in revenue. Let's add in our holiday table. We want some dimensions. So of course we want the holiday. And I believe we don't really need anything else. Let's use a left join so we can save that. Now let's close this. If we go and look at our data sources, you can see we have some blended data here. If I click on that blended data and I take the holiday and I bring that in, you can see the holidays there. Let me delete this so we have a little bit more room. We bring that in, and let's bring in revenue as our metric. And now you see what we have is blended data set where we have our null values. We have our holidays here. And we have our revenue figures. So the null values, we're going to deal with that in a moment. So now that we have our holiday data with the holidays and the revenue attached to it, we want to be able to make this a little bit more visually appealing. For example, we can see there's a null value there. And what we can do is fix this using a calculated field. So we can see we're on the blended data source. You can go to dimensions, click dimension, go to create field, And then now we can write in the field that we want. I'm going to call this holiday revised. Once you have that, what you can do is add a function called ifNull. And we can see the arguments that ifNull takes. It takes the column and then it returns a value. So what we can do is feed it the holiday column and let's put this in, encapsulate that. And in the holiday column, if it finds null, what we want to tell it is give us a normal day. And let's see if this is approved. And you see the syntax is approved. And now that I have that, I'm going to click this off and hit apply. And now you can see in this table we have holiday revised. And I'm going to get rid of holiday here. And now you see we have a normal day instead of null. Now that we have that, let's turn this into a different visual. But as you see, this is getting quite crowded. So I'm going to drag this up a little bit. And I want to change the page size where we get a little bit more room. And you can do that by going up to page. And then you can go to current page settings. Go to style. And then we can change this height to something longer. So you can see now it is longer and we have a bit more room there. Now that we have this table, just seeing that of course most of the revenue is going to happen on a normal day, but we want to see the average revenue that is made during that period. So we can go over to the aggregation here and click into revenue, and we're going to go to average. And now you can see the average revenue for each day. And you can see there's quite a difference here. We can see that normal day has gone from being first down to the 8th position. And that's a good insight to have because we already have one table here. So it might be better to turn this into a bar chart. So I'm going to go over to highlight the chart, go back over to our chart table, and I'm going to choose a bar chart. And now you can see that it's changed a little bit, and we can customize that a bit by pulling out the columns here. And now we can see which has the best average day revenue. So let's talk about controlling and filtering our data. We can give the end user the ability to slice and dice the data according to what they prefer. And usually you definitely want to have a date filter and some kind of other filter that gives the user that ability to make the data larger or smaller. A gut check to see the range of the data that you have in terms of dates is to look at a line chart. And we can see we have something that starts from 2010 December all the way to December 2011. So in order to add a date control, we go up to control, we go to date range, and then you can see this box is highlighted. I'm going to put it in the corner. Now that we have that, we can select a range. So I'm going to choose a date that is within my range. So I'm going to click into the year. I'm going to choose 2011. And I'm going to choose February 1st as my start date. And then I'm going to do the same by clicking into the year, going to 2011, going to February, but instead of the 1st, I'm going to choose the 28th. So we have a month's worth of data. Our data has been filtered and our visuals are changing. Now, a great thing about a date filter is our ability to use KPIs that are based on the date. So what I want to do is get revenue over in our e-commerce data and grab that. See that we have $88,618. And let's pull this out a little bit. And if we know this is a currency, we can go into our data by hitting the edit into the edit data source. We can go into, then we can go down to currency, and we can change this to the currency we prefer. So I'm going to choose USD. Then I'm going to go over to done. And now we can see that as a dollar amount. And we highlight it. You can go over to the right side and we can use a comparison range to turn this into a key performance indicator or a KPI. And right now we have February 1st to the 28th selected, and we don't have a comparison range, but we can add one. We can add a fixed one by adding the range in here, or we can go up to the corner and choose when we want to compare. So in this date range, I'm going to choose previous period. And then you can see the previous period is highlighted here with the start and end date. And now that has turned into a KPI. There is revenue that has decreased from the previous period. Let's do one more of these as an example. Let's go and grab quantity and grab that over. Now we have the quantity and we can put that next to our top revenue KPI. And we can do the same by adding a comparison date here, going to the corner where it says none and adding a previous period and hitting apply. And now we can see that also has changed. Now you can kind of start to see the beginnings of a dashboard. Let's add another control here. So we know we have country here as a control. So if we bring this in, it's going to auto turn into a map. But let's bring in a drop-down list, and we can place that over our date filter. And it selected the weekday name, but this is not what we want. So we can go back over to, we can see the control field here. And we can replace weekday name with country by just hovering over it, and you can see the indentation. Now we have country. We can go to the drop down and we can click the check mark to see, okay, so if I click UK, we can start to see these numbers change. You can see that number has changed and the KPI has changed. The next biggest one would be, we're going to click that off, and let's go to France, which is quite a degree smaller, and we can also see when things have been bought. So I'm going to click this. We can also use a visual as a filter. So, and we can do that with a map. But first, let's make this a little bit smaller so we can bring a map in. I'm going to look at this particular visual by highlighting it, going to style, and I want to kind of make the numbers here smaller. We can, if we click into style, you can see everything has some control here. And I'm going to make the table labels the smallest I can, which are going to be 8. And you can see that has gotten a lot smaller. So I'm going to move this table down a bit and move our other tables down. And I think I'm going to move our bar chart up. And I'm going to make this a little bit tighter so we have a little bit more control. And I'm also going to bring this up and make it a little bit more compact so we can fit everything on this page at the moment. And then what I can do is I can press Control and A, which highlights everything. And I can then press Control A to select different things. And I'm going to pull everything down a bit, higher up. I want to create a map, so we're going to go over to our data source, which is the e-commerce data source, which has our map, and we can select that here. We're going to go over to country and just drag and drop that. And now you can see you have one type of map. But we're going to go back over to the chart here because this is the Google Maps. And we can see the shape map here. So that's a filled map. And then we can also look at the one that is a heat map. And we can look at the geo chart. So this is a very pretty chart. And if we choose country, we can see that highlight where that country is located. So we can just add all the countries back and we can see that highlight. So once we have this map, we can go over to the right side and choose cross filtering for that map. And now what that map allows us to do is click into one of these locations. So we know that United Kingdom is our biggest customer and Australia is a very small customer. So if we click Australia, you can see the chart actually updates. We can click Finland and it updates. We can click Germany and the UK. Also, you can see that this will also be filtered. So sometime you might want to use a visual that allows you to just click into the map. I don't think it's a very intuitive part. It's a good indicator, but not a good user experience. So I'm going to take off cross-filtering here. And you can see that data is populated again. Now we can go back and you see when we cross-filter, the problem is that it will also filter your date. So let's go back and apply our dates. And this time I'm going to use March 1st. And then I'm going to choose March, the end of March, which is March 31st, and apply. And we can see that revenue jumped up quite a bit compared to the previous time period. Let's look at one other type of control you can add. So if we are looking at our line chart here, we might want to give the user the ability to see revenue and quantity. Of course, you can see those at the same time by just dragging and dropping this metric in, and we can see both of those there. But we don't have the ability to control which one we see. However, you can by going to optional metric here, and then bringing revenue down under optional metric. And now you have an option that is indicated with this icon. So if I click that, you can see now I can choose both or either. So that's another type of control we can use. So you've done all the hard work. Now it's time to visualize. And this is where all the background work you've done to get your data in the right format is going to shine. So we can think about how we need to visualize this. And usually when you visualize your data, you want to go from simplistic to complex, and you want to make sure you highlight the most important numbers first and be very clear in your visual style. So let's look at some of the options we have in Data Studio. Now, we have this whole canvas that we're working with, and we can change the style of this canvas by, if you're not clicking on any specific visual, we can go to Theme and Layout. And you can see all the different themes and layouts here. And these are just very good color schemes that we can use. I'm just going to use this one here called Lagoon. And now you can see that our canvas is black and the color scheme has changed. You could definitely use another one that is dark like that. But I like the Lagoon layout and I like the black background. So I'm going to use those simplistic colors there. Now we can think about customizing some of our visuals. So the first thing I want to do is I want to utilize the immediate view for our consumer. So the first thing they see is going to be the most important number. I am going to block my dashboard into 3 parts. And I'm going to do this using align. And you can go to the symbol here and get align. And then I am just going to, you can see when you move that line around, I'm just going to pull that over. And now I have one section. And I can copy that line again with Control C and then Control V to paste that line. But I need more room, so I'm going to clean this up a bit, just make it a little bit bigger so I have more room to work. And if you remember, we can go over to our page, current settings, go to style, and you can see I have more room down there. I'm going to Control and A, and I'm going to bring everything down where I'm going to try to utilize this one section here for one view. So I'm going to work on this section first by these 2 numbers are very important to me. So the first thing I want to do is make those numbers bigger. So I'm highlighting both of those by just Control and clicking those 2. I'm going to go over to Style. And now I have access on both of those styles. We can make those numbers compact and where they are no longer the full amount. And we have the decimal point here. And you can change the decimal point. I am going to make these very large. So I'm going to increase the size where you see labels. And then I want to stack these so I can see both of those numbers. And I also want to take this and create a view where I can see the line here. So I'm going to copy this and paste. So Control V and Control. And now we can see that this is quite a lot to look at. We have an axis, but I'm going to take this off and try to create some spark lines. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the optional metric there. And we're looking at revenue first. So I'm just going to grab revenue from our amount and I'm going to replace the quantity here where it's just replacing and get rid of quantity. I'm going to go over to style and I am going to eliminate some of the elements here. So I don't want to show axis, so I'm going to take that off. And then we have this grid here, so we can also remove that grid. We can choose transparent for the grid. And also I want to change the color of this to something that really pops. So instead of having this color, I'm going to have an orange. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this smaller and I'm going to make it fit under this as a spark, kind of like a spark line. So I have that. What I'm doing in this section, I'm going to speed it up a little bit so you can see how this is done. Organizing, and you can create these with the Sparkline visual, but I wanted to take you through it manually. We can change how this is optimized. We can change these to cumulative charts. We can show the labels, which is quite messy when that is small. And you can also show points. So I am going to add a trend line by going here, and under this you can add a trend line and you can choose what type of trend line. And I'm just going to use mine. And I actually want to go back and change my colors back to our original because I think it doesn't look very good. Now the next thing I want to do is add a title, and we can do that with the text. So I'm going to get a title and move it all the way over. That's going to take up that space. I am going to fill that with a color, and I want to use the same blue that I used before. And then I want to be able to write some text in there, and I can just by highlighting that. And I'm going to call this my online revenue, and I am going to make sure I'm going to turn that bold, and I'm going to make that centered. And I'm going to make it much bigger, which are our controls and filters. Highlight those. And I'm going to go to style. And I'm going to change that background to our uniform color there. And I'm also going to make the text slightly smaller. The next thing I want to do is really highlight this map. So I'm going to make it much larger. And I also do not want the legend here. So I'm going to go to Style. I'm going to go over and eliminate the legend. So we can see that we're starting to get a dashboard together that's going to be very clean and very organized. I also want to give the end user a little bit more information about what's going on. So I like to prompt with questions. For example, how are we doing monthly? And this answers our main question. And I like to have that as a heading. And if you see this little G, that's Grammarly. It's not native to Google Data Studio. I am going to center it, and then I'll have that. I will organize these. I'm going to copy and paste this. So in this section, all I'm doing is adding our headings, organizing things with a little bit more in line, and I want to make sure that the headings and everything falls in the same line and make sure that we have enough room for everything that's on this section. What we can do now is we can start organizing this. So this is no longer needed, but we need to make sure we're answering some of those central questions. We want to make sure that we are giving the user the ability to see the trends, where the money's coming from, and be able to filter. But we want to make sure that all of these sections get the same amount of attention. So I am going to need more space a little bit. So I'm going to go back over. So here I'm going to organize the dashboard a little bit more. You know, this takes a little bit of time. I'm adding other lines to make sure those sections are different. And then I wanted to turn the one line graph into a bar graph that brought in our descriptions of products, because it was one of the things that we were required to do by our design brief to make sure we showed the top products. So now we have these sections. We have a section which gives us when the orders are coming from. We have a very clear idea of a very clean dashboard. But the next thing I want to do is center everything and add some icons, because icons really make things pop. And if you want to get some free icons, there's great sites like Flat Icons. So I'm going to insert an icon. So I'm going to go here and we're going to look for image. And then here it's going to ask you where you want to put that. I'm just going to use the little cross and say there. And you see this box opens up. And then if you go over to the right, you can see select file. I have some icons here that I already have downloaded. And you can eliminate the background if you need for icons by using like something like PNG tools. And what I'm going to do is just make this a little bit smaller. So now we kind of look like we have a logo from a business. So now we have our online revenue dashboard there. And I want to add an icon at each one of the sections here to make it look a little bit more professional. So I'm going to go back over, insert, click, select a file, and for revenue, I'm going to choose this particular symbol. And I'm just going to put that one here in the middle. I am going to just add another icon there, going back to the insert and then image. I'm going to go down and I'm going to highlight that and insert to select the file. You can also do this with the link. And I am going to just choose this one. Bring that in for our heat map. It's not the best. We just make it smaller. So I'm going to do some final organizing of my dashboard, and you can see I'm selecting the date to make sure everything is working. This gives us the ability to see if some of the charts are interacting with some of the visuals, so I can organize that. Remember that you can use the sparkline visual if you want, but now you have a dashboard that is very telling, where it tells us where our online revenue is coming from with our map. We have the trends and our trend line to show us everything. We also have the revenue breakdown that gives us what is most wanted on our dashboard. I think we have created something that we can be proud of, and you will have more confidence in building dashboards with Data Studio. Thank you.